Hello and welcome to Social Perspectives. I'm J. Gentile Everett, and we're delighted that you've joined us tonight. Tonight's lead: has the community become too busy for the church? Or has the church become too irrelevant for the community? That's what we will probe into on tonight's show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Sometimes God interrupts the normal course of history and gives us leaders whose gifts and insights are used to transform a generation. We have the privilege of presenting such a leader. He is an accomplished jazz musician, best-selling author, entrepreneur, and beloved CM minister of Mill Branch Baptist Church, J.G. Everett Ministries. Our host, Dr. J. Gentile Everett.
Welcome back to Social Perspectives. No one can argue that weekly church attendance has gone down precipitously. None of us can argue that fact. Think about it. Once upon a time, churches, particularly African American churches, would have services all day. And all day people stayed at church. The morning service and the afternoon service and the evening service. Most of us, if you were born during certain periods of our time, it was understood you were going to church and you were going to be there all day, if necessary. I remember vividly, my mother never asked me whether or not I wanted to be on a choir or be on an usher board, or even to be in a play. She would simply commit my services and let me know the time that she expected me to be prepared so I could go where she suggested. What happened? Certainly not the case anymore. I know we have the internet, and the internet certainly has opened up a lot of eyes. One of the things about education, and I am one who has always espoused education. I believe in it. Sometimes education, though, can get in our way of finding our way to God. It can even retard our growth. Sometimes it can just downright keep us away. I'm here today to try to probe into what are some of these reasons and what can we do to try to make it better. One of the things we've come into contact is in recent years, church has remained stuck in a period. And many of them are happy being in that period. And they are really not interested in moving out of that period. For an example, once upon a time, you went to church and you heard mainly Bible stories. Ministers would preach and they would preach Bible stories. That's what you got Sunday after Sunday. And then at that time, most churches embraced an eschatological theology. Well, what is eschatological theology? Eschatological theology is a theology that deals with the end time. What is God going to do in the end time? When time ends and eternity takes over, that's called eschatology. Surely you remember, some of you would go to church and you would hear about robes and wings and golden slippers, golden streets, walls of jasper and mansions. And every Sunday, week after week after week, we would hear about these wonderful times that are on the way. All you got to do is keep on living. Then you'll go to heaven. Here's the problem. When you're 7 years old, or 10, or 20, or even 40, and nowadays, much older than that, who really spends a great deal of time looking forward to dying? See, we live in another world. We see the things that we were promised that heaven would give Many of us are seeing that in the existential moment of the here and the now. So they're saying, why do I need to die to get these things? Why can't I have them here? One of the things, we need to change our approach and recognize that an eschatological doctrine to lead particularly young people to Christ is a failing one. And it will continue to be a failing one. Secondly, there are cultural differences. People have different sexual orientations. Some churches have gotten stuck even in who they consider to be a Christian and who they want in their church and who should be allowed to do this, that, or the other. Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm not trying to be a spokesman for any social group, but I do know salvation does not convey a judgeship. And just because you consider yourself saved, that does not position you to try to make determinations for other people, because God is the only judge. We live in a time where church has to compete with many other things out there, internet. Many young people spend a lot of time on the internet. I mean, they look up everything, even religion. And I'm here to tell you, the internet offers some interesting concepts about religion that to some people, it makes more sense than even the traditional stuff that we have been taught. Take this for an example. I was under the impression that certain people should not be allowed to do certain things in churches because of the kind of lifestyle they have. Isn't that sad? When did it get to the place where the mistakes that you've made in your life will be mistakes that will be used against you for the rest of your life, spiritually and religiously? I think that's way out of bounds. Did you ever remember the time when the young girl that had the child out of wedlock, she would have to come before the church and ask the church for the church to forgive her? Maybe some of you heard about that. You know what was interesting about that? I remember, and I was a very, very young pastor, and when I first became acquainted with that. And the deacon came to me and said to me, Pastor, we need to bring this young girl before the church because she has committed folly, and we don't want folly in our congregation. I said, well, what about the folly of the leadership? All you know is that this young person got evidence of what she did. What about all of the other things that go on very similar to this where there's no evidence, but we know it goes on? Maybe there's no evidence because the partner involved might be beyond childbearing years. Does that make that person better because they were not caught? The other thing that was interesting to me about that, they never brought up the man. When did the woman have a child by herself? I mean, let's be candid about this thing. There was only one immaculate conception, and that was Jesus. Surely we cannot expect that to have happened again. The church is in a crisis, and we do need to do something about the attendance. One of the things that's going to help our attendance is when we open up and admit to the community our own shortcomings and that we're all in here trying to get it together. Nobody has it together. We're in the church because we need to be there ourselves. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We'll talk about how to get those numbers up.
Been feeling like this my last chance on.
What's up, world? It's Rough Guy Rhymes, the leader of the Dream Big lifestyle, and I'm here to tell you to dream big.
Welcome back to Social Perspectives. We were talking about church attendance and how it has been failing precipitously for a number of years. We do recognize the importance of work. People have to work to support their families, and we do recognize that some jobs require people to have to give their time to work for the financial health of their family. I understand that, and we all should understand that. Where we go from here, though, we need to understand when people are working, they are still doing something that God would want them to do, and that is to be a provider for their family. But the real problem is too many churches just refuse to move into social modernity. That's a good name. There are cultural dissidents out there that's made up their mind that since the church will not move into social modernity, they will remain a dissident. They will remain outside of it because they find it boring, they find it hypocritical, and they find it inauthentic. The last thing that a church should be trying to do is to cause everybody to be cut by the same cloth or to walk exactly like they walk and do exactly like they do. Let's not robotize Christianity. God does not want us to be robots. He wants us to be human beings. And we are fallible, all of us. We all come short. So when the church becomes real in their position and say to the community, we're asking you to come here so that you can be helped. And you do not need to look at the church and use it as your ultimate standard of morality, nor religious standard of service. Well, let's go to the Bible. If you were to go to the book of Genesis and start reading at Genesis 12 and go all the way to probably Genesis 35, you will discover something interesting. Abraham, who was the first patriarch that we have, God made this wonderful covenant with him. We know that story. Abraham built several altars in his life, several altars. What does that suggest? That suggests that he spent a lot of time in worshiping, because at that time, we did not have temples and we did not have buildings. We didn't even have the tabernacle, which was a mobile tent that would go from place to place. He hadn't gotten to that part in the development of our own walk with God. He built several altars, indicating that he worshiped God a lot at various places. Wherever he would be, he would take time and worship God. He would build this altar as a symbol to God that this is the place where we worship you. Now, I want you all to be careful and follow this. That's Abraham. He built several altars. Abraham had a son. Abraham's son was Isaac. We know that. Isaac, on the other hand, built one altar. Isaac had a son. His name was Jacob. And Jacob built one altar. Jacob had 12 children. Y'all have heard of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's the same person. None of his children built an altar. Now, isn't that interesting? What does that tell me? That tells me there was a deteriorating sense of worship from generation to generation. That sense of worship deteriorated. Perhaps that's what contributed to another interesting phenomenon about the Bible. Read the earlier part of Genesis, Look at how long people lived. These really long, elongated lives. I mean, really long, really old people. And they still kept vim and vigor and vitality. They had all of that. But we noticed something. As man continued to live, he continued to sin. As he continued to sin, his life got shorter. That's where we get the theological parallel that we see in the New Testament, where we are taught the wages of sin is death. The gift of God is eternal life. So before we jump down the throat of these young people that we see today and how they seem to be losing their sense of worship, many Sundays for many people are merely the extension of Saturday. That's all it is, an extension of Saturday. They do on Sunday what they were not able to finish on Saturday. But I'm just trying to point out this is not the first time. It even happened in biblical days with biblical people. So this sense of deteriorating worship is not new. It's not a new manifestation at all. It's been with us before. But there are some things we can do that can make an impact in trying to reverse those numbers. One of those things that we must do over and above all else, we must show the community we're human. It's okay. Admit that you are human. Admit that you are fallible. It's okay. Listen, if you didn't have sin, there would be no need for you to come to church at all. Church is for people who need God, not people who don't need Him. Even Jesus said, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. So for all of you who have this idea that it's important for me to put my holiness on superficial display, we do an injustice because we are passing ourselves off as inauthentic. Stay tuned. We'll be right back in our conclusion on Is the Church Still Relevant?
It's a lifestyle. It's a culture. More than just a brand. The Dolce.
Welcome back to Social Perspectives. We were just talking about how church attendance has been falling. And we were giving some reasons as to why we felt like churches were suffering because of a lack of participation and a lack of interest. Now we're going to talk about an interesting concept, and that has to do with social propinquity. And what that simply means is, propinquity means if a person is subject to do something or to be a certain way because they are in close proximity of that particular behavior. For example, if children grow up in a home of profanity, it is very likely, it is highly believed that that child will be one who employs profanity in their conversations. If our younger people are going to be around people older than they are, parents and grandparents, who do not exhibit an interest in the faith or church, they too will tend to be the same way and not involve themselves. They will choose to do other things. What I am suggesting that the church considers The time has come for us to move with time. You might have to change your order of worship. You might have to change what you emphasize in that liturgical moment. If people go to church today and church is conducted the same way it was conducted in 1965, it's going to be very difficult to bring younger people in to that fold because they cannot relate to a 1965 ecclesiology or a 1965 concept of God. Our younger people are digital thinkers. They come into the world with these digital minds. Worship service, therefore, must incorporate some of that kind of activity to keep the kid interested. I'm from a family of educators, and it's interesting. I listened to my sister and my sisters, and I wasn't involved in education myself many years ago. And I remember it's very difficult to get a kid to sit and listen to a lecture for an hour. Very difficult. Their minds are programmed differently. They need to see flashes of light, images on a screen, movement of people in color, with all kinds of dynamics, graphics that interrupt the teaching moment. That's what keeps them. Churches must remember, what are we called to do? We are called to reach this present age. Not the age of 1950, not the age of 1960, but this present age. We cannot use methods that they used 40 years ago to try to bring that young person into the fold. That method is obsolete. The principle, yes, is still good. God's principles remain the same, but its methods. I have something I would like for you to think about. All of you Christians out there, let's suppose tonight, this night, a Jew, man 33 years old, with 12 men walking with him. They had on sandals, they had on long robes, and let's suggest that there were some rich women that was in the group. And this man and this group showed up at your house. Now you are very religious now, okay? You go to church and you sing on the choir. You love God and all of that. You really have a good time in church, right? Okay. Now let's suppose this Jew man with these 12 disciples and some rich women that are there with them. And by the way, the rich women use their money to look after the Jew. That's the leader. Now, for those of you who still thinking I'm out of my mind, let me tell you, this is scripturally based. Go to St. Luke chapter 8, verse 3. You will see it. There were rich women that walked with Jesus, traveled with Jesus. And the Bible said, and they were some were even married. And the Bible said, out of their own substance, they would take care of him. Oh my goodness gracious. All of the religious people, y'all were in church last Sunday, but tonight, this Jew with 12 other men and some women knock on your door and they say to you, we plan to abide in your house tonight. I wonder what your reaction will be. I doubt very seriously if there is a Christian that I know. I doubt. And I'm not judging anybody here, but I just doubt. Even I would even have to doubt me. It would be hard for me to imagine that this man and these people gonna come in my house and they're gonna spend the night and I'm gonna feed them and take care of them. And at the same time, for those of you who say how much you love Jesus, you probably would not want him to show up that way. Well, I have news for you. First century Judaism, first century in Judea, that's how he traveled. That's how he moved around. Now the question is, would Jesus come that way today? I submit he would not. He would teach the same things he taught. He would want us to believe the same way he tried for the society to believe that time. But his methods would be different. Because now we have seen too much tragedy to trust that to be legitimate Jesus. We would have problems. We've seen too much killing. We've seen too many ugly things have happened to people because of their own naivete. So no, we would not do it. Bottom line is this. If we're going to reach the present age, we got to have methods that will draw the present age and not use methods that are obsolete and expect them to work. I'm going to have to leave it there. I'm J. Gentile Everett. Come back and see us another time next week on Social Perspectives.
Thank you.